Okay, this is the second video on this site, the Poetics of Thought, and the second video in this project. I don't want to introduce all these videos in this way, but until I get kind of used to the format of how I'm presenting these videos, this is how I'm going to do it. And also, in terms of this particular video, I've written some stuff down first, so I'm going to read parts of this. It's not ideal, I recognise that, but it's given me a little bit more confidence to stick to the script, if you like. But what I want to do with this introduction is try to break down what kind of things I'm going to be talking about over the course of the videos that I make. I'm not quite sure how many videos it's going to take me actually to get through this project. I would anticipate a couple of hundred, but I might be wrong on that. I might be way off. But I am envisaging, I have got a kind of trajectory in mind of the things I want to talk about, and so I've mapped that out. So I'm going to just try and read some of this stuff off. And basically what I'm thinking of is that the videos break into three broad sections, three parts if you like, and deal with three different aspects of the things I want to be talking about. Okay, so I'm starting reading here, so I apologise if this sounds really stilted. It's just the way it is. Okay, part one, and I'm kind of titling this part "Coming to One's Senses," or possibly "Coming to My Senses." And I owe that a debt of thanks for that title actually to someone who left a comment on one of my videos, which is that statement about coming to your senses, and I just really like the idea of it. So that's the first part. Okay, and what it says here is, this first part will introduce the background of ideas through which we might begin to understand what the term poetics of thought might mean. I'll be tracing a philosophical and scientific trajectory out of evolutionary theory, particularly understandings concerning the evolution of mind, and this will be extended mainly through the philosophical traditions of phenomenology and then on into the cognitive sciences and related fields, particularly things like cognitive linguistics, embodied cognition, experiential philosophy, those areas. Okay, central to this trajectory out of evolutionary psychology particularly, will be the proposition that the cerebral activity that we call thought was originally no more than a set of cognitive and sensory mechanisms for negotiating the physical environment in which our ancestors were embedded. There's nothing remarkable about that. That's pretty standard evolutionary psychology stuff. Then I will be addressing the question of how it is that a middle-sized social biped with this limited and contingent cognitive system can begin to think not only of the concrete and perceivable stuff of lived experience, the trees, the tigers, the potential mates that our minds originally evolved to recognize and engage with, but also the abstract ideas that dominate the thoughts of modern humans. Love, science, art, politics, religion. All concepts that make no impact on the senses whatsoever, and yet make the greatest of sense and of what modern human life is all about. I think it could fairly be argued. This making sense, this meaningful sense-making, I will argue again, is best understood as a kind of poetry. And this term poetry I'm going to be using extensively, and I'm going to have to be quite careful about how I define it, which I'll be moving on to. All concepts, so I've just been talking about these abstract concepts that no impact on the senses and understood poetically. Okay, this theme of poetics will be developed with reference to psychoanalysis, particularly to the work of James Hillman, who I'm very fond of, to the various poetics of Gaston Bachelard and others in that vein, and to recent explorations within cognitive linguistics and experiential philosophy, particularly what I regard as the seminal work of George Lakoff and Mark Johnson, and indeed others. By the end of that first section, I want the groundwork to be laid for an understanding perhaps best summed up by Mark Johnson when he writes, and this is in a book called The Meaning of the Body, when he writes, "Meaning and thought emerge from our capacity for perception, object manipulation and bodily movement." Okay, so that's the kind of stage I want to get to by the end of the first part. The second part, which at the moment is tentatively titled Empirical Knowledge and Other Kinds of Poetry, or other kinds of boredom advertised as poetry. In this part of the project, I want to begin to distinguish different forms of thought and the different poetic devices which are used to allow these distinctions to operate. Although a number of different types of mental content will be considered, fantasy, belief, hope, desire, hypothesis, faith, a central concern will be the idea of knowledge, particularly rational empirical knowledge or science, which I will claim utilizes conceptual and expressive devices. That means not just devices of language, but devices of thought, to assert its status as what Richard Dawkins referred to as the poetry of reality. This will be followed by a consideration of the various subcategories of knowledge, or these practices which are sometimes called knowledge. Things like occult knowledge, religious knowledge, situated knowledge, carnal knowledge. And what I'll be doing there is trying to advance a claim that these various types of knowledge, and I'm putting that in inverted commas, share a common poetic framework, that each of those draws on a set of metaphors and figures of speech and thought which serve to organize our understanding of these different forms. And I should just state at this point that I will not be claiming, absolutely not be claiming, that all knowledge is relative, and that because empirical knowledge is expressed poetically, that it has an equivalence with other forms of knowledge or other forms of thought. I'm absolutely not making that kind of relativistic claim. On the contrary, I will be asserting that this mobilization of a common poetic framework for different types of knowing inevitably, and indeed accurately I would say, leads to a hierarchy in which some kind of knowledge are understood as more valuable than others. I will be saying that empirical knowledge has a claim for a higher status than other forms of knowledge. I will also be saying that the particular space that empirical knowledge occupies within its genre of poetic cognition and expression is unique, and I will be saying that that reflects its unique status within the social life of thought. As a complement to this, I'll be proposing that the other conceptual content that I've already mentioned, fantasies, beliefs, hopes, desires, dreams, faiths, those kind of things, all that stuff that threads through human life, has different values and is perhaps best rendered in its own poetic terms, and different kinds of thought form will have a different kind of poetic form, a different genre attached to it. So that's where I want to go to with part 2, broadly speaking, a poetic analysis of the concept of knowledge and how it relates to other forms of thought. The final part, part 3, and this is the most tentative, I'm really not sure about this at all yet, but this is my current thinking on this, which I'm at the moment titling Code is Poetry. And what I say here is that I want to use the final part of this project to explore different modes of writing and speaking and being expressive, perhaps suggesting different modes of thinking that might align with these other poetic constructions. I'm particularly interested in the possibilities inherent in the kinds of writing and speaking practices that we here on YouTube and those on Twitter and Facebook and on blogs and wikis might find themselves somehow giving voice to. What kinds of poetry is at work in the grammar of cascading style sheets and semantic databases? How might the protocols of the network be understood as creating figures of collective speech? And to what extent are we able to embody these figurations in the tissues of our own understandings? Is there a place in the wires for other kinds of thinking, or for the thinking of other thoughts, knowledge and belief, fantasy and desire? The needle skips back to the beginning of the record, and as the car accelerates down the slip road and merges with the traffic on the motorway, we can look out the windows of our car at the people in the cars in the adjacent lane. Their lips are moving and they are smiling. He is making a joke and she's pretending she hasn't heard it before. In the back, the children are singing along with the radio. Okay, so that's the introduction I've got to so far. I don't know how coherent it is. I don't know if I'll find it coherent in a couple of weeks' time. But that's kind of where I'm up to with my thinking in terms of how it lays out. But there are some things about structure which I'm thinking about. Because I'm working this project through, I'm kind of thinking my way into these ideas live, and I'm thinking into it through the vehicle of YouTube. Inevitably, some of the structure of YouTube and the structure of this kind of interaction is going to be paramount in my thinking and affecting of the poetics. Things like the 10-minute rule, which I think I'm probably over already on this video, is going to affect how this works. So right, that's where I'm up to so far with that. If you've got any comments or thoughts, I'd love to hear them. Bye for now.